All right. So my name is Adam Driscoll, and today we're going to be looking at what is new in PowerShell Universal version 5. So just a quick little intro about me. I am the owner of Ironman Software and the inventor of PowerShell Universal. I'm a former PowerShell MVP, and I've been in the PowerShell space for, 15 years or so. I blog, I have a YouTube channel, I make open source software, obviously PowerShell Universal, and I always call myself a hobby collector. And this is me at the American Birkebeiner, which actually originates kind of here in Scandinavia. It's kind of a tradition in Norway where they actually saved a prince and had to ski this certain amount of distance. So every year we ski that distance, and then we don't take a prince, we pretty much end up at the bar. So, why PowerShell Universal? So if you've never played with PowerShell Universal before, I just want to give a little kind of overview of what it is. It's kind of the Swiss Army knife of tool building for PowerShell. It has some basic things like script execution and scheduling, something that you'd expect from something for PowerShell, similar to like task scheduler and something like GitHub Actions, where you can just execute your PowerShell scripts, except that it's built for PowerShell. It also has some additional features for kind of delivering those tools to end users, so they don't need to know anything about PowerShell, such as HTTP REST endpoints, where you can call PowerShell scripts from web clients that may or may not be, on Windows or even running on a full computer. Web-based interfaces that are extremely interactive, so you can build all kinds of tools for your users that may not even be a technical user at all. So you can think of reporting tools and even like onboarding tools, like creating users and that kind of thing. Kind of cross-cutting the PowerShell Universal platform are some features that kind of help with your coding process and kind of your development and deployment processes. One being Git integration, so you can kind of work with your team to kind of store your code and use Git flow to push that code out to either your development or production environments. We've also added code-based deployments, which I'll be demonstrating today, to actually create PowerShell Universal packages that then you can push out to your environments that are kind of based on an artifact similar to what you would do in maybe a C# compiled project. PowerShell Universal also integrates with a bunch of things in the PowerShell ecosystem. So it has PS Script Analyzer support, integrates with editor services, secret management, PS Resource Get, and Pester, which has been added in version 5. We also have enterprise security over the top of the whole platform. So you can connect to things like SAML to OpenID Connect, to like Entra ID, Windows authentication to on-premises Active Directory. And then you can use groups from those providers to provide role-based access and fine-grained permissions inside PowerShell Universal. Additionally, PowerShell Universal Wallet is built on .NET Core and kind of the same technology as PowerShell 7. It does support Windows PowerShell, so you can continue to kind of transition or just use Windows PowerShell with this newer technology that's on top of it, or coexist with both. So what's new in PowerShell Universal v5? First and foremost, we have a new Blazor-based admin console. It looks very similar to the v4 console because it's actually using the same UI library as v4, but it's using the Blazor technology. And that brings us a lot closer to the underlying technology of PowerShell Universal and PowerShell itself. So rather than having to have this whole like JavaScript framework and that kind of thing, we can write everything in C# and interface with our underlying components a lot better. While we built that admin console, we also added an end user portal. So versions before version 5 were very admin focused, and you kind of had to develop all your own tools for your end users. The end user portal provides a way to quickly provide scripts or apps to users without having to do too many other things or learn too much about PowerShell Universal if you want to deliver something quickly. Along those same lines, we also have a a way to kind of extend the portal. I'll talk a little bit about portal pages and widgets. It's kind of more of an advanced topic, but it allows you to really extend the admin console to have all kinds of features. And we hope eventually to ship more and more of those from Ironman Software so that you guys can just get it added to your environment and quickly get up and running with some cool little UI pieces. We've integrated Pester in this version, so we have some very basic Pester execution, and we store the Pester test results in the PowerShell Universal database so that you can look at them over time. I'll show an example of that. Code-based deployments I talked a little bit about. It'll make more sense if I actually demonstrate that, so in my demo I will show you a code-based deployment and you can see what that means. We've also added fine-grained permissions. So in version 4, we had role-based access, obviously, but those permissions for those roles were kind of statically defined. Now you can use the fine-grained permission system to narrow down what users can do within the admin console. So you could, for example, have a scheduler user that can only schedule scripts, but they can't access or edit those scripts. Or you could have a user that can only access certain scripts, edit certain scripts, execute certain scripts, that kind of thing. In kind of relation to the portal pages and widgets, we've also integrated what we call the PSU Gallery. Really, it's just a filter over the PowerShell Gallery that looks for things with certain tags about PowerShell Universal. But the idea is that you can discover PowerShell Universal modules, and when you install them into PowerShell Universal, features will be added to the platform automatically without you having to write any code. So we're trying to add, useful features like Active Directory scripts and that kind of thing, but also provide things that maybe don't look super useful on the surface, but also provide good examples of how to build apps and that kind of thing. We've added PostgreSQL support. So currently we support SQLite, MS SQL, but we've been asked for like a free database. So we also support PostgreSQL now. And finally, we've re-architected our commandlets to use a gRPC protocol, one for performance reasons. It's a remoting protocol by Google, and one because it gives us a single layer of how we communicate with PowerShell Universal. Both on the back end and on the front end, the commandlets all use the same protocol. So, demo. We have a demo of the admin console. I'm going to do a demo of the portal. I'm going to do a little demo of debugging. If you saw a couple days ago, I actually showed this off, but I'll show it again in a couple different ways. I'm going to show off the Pester integration, and I will go through a deployment demo, and then I have a couple secret features at the end that I will show off if we get there. So, all right. Nice. So... all right, I am running PowerShell Universal directly from my debugger here, which is cool. And this is running our V5.6 version, actually. So this will be released sometime in July. And it adds a couple more things, but what we were mostly trying to address with 5.6 was rounding out some features, fixing bugs, fixing some UX stuff. So it's not a big change from what you'll find up on 5.5 right now. So if you first come into the admin console here, you're going to see kind of a breakdown of your PowerShell Universal environment. If you're familiar with V4, we also had a home page, but we've tried to increase the density of the data here. So you're going to find information about jobs that are running on your environment, sessions for users that are either accessing the admin console or if they're accessing apps. Some information about the resources that are defined within this environment, so you can see things like how many apps are running, scripts that are defined, and that kind of thing. And then some health checks about my PowerShell Universal environment. And you can see my laptop is suffering right now. It says the memory utilization has failed, so it probably is over 90% memory utilization or something. We've also added some additional features for digging into other information about your PowerShell Universal environment. For example, if you start any processes, I have an API process running in Windows PowerShell. I have the PowerShell Universal server running. You'll get information about, the working set of memory and that kind of thing. But you'll also get information about the internals of those processes, like the run spaces that are currently running or open inside those processes. So this works with jobs and APIs and apps and that kind of thing. Some other things that we've added into the admin console include an API tester. So if you come to your API and you go look at your API, we now have this test tab that has a bunch of options that we can provide to test our API out. Things like the body, you can add headers in, you can add query string parameters, and as you add those things, it'll actually generate the PowerShell script that you need to call to invoke your API. Additionally, kind of like Postman, if you've ever used that, it actually has a history so that you can keep track of all those things that you've updated inside the API tester, and then reapply those same tests to execute it again. In the automation section, we've added some new kind of like nice to have features around scripts. So you'll see that we have a lot of buttons here all of a sudden. We've added a quick run button to quickly run a script really quickly without jumping over to the job every single time. Just starts it with the default values and then runs that job. We've added access to the permission system, so you can actually apply permissions to the scripts for different users inside PowerShell Universal or roles, whatever you kind of decide there. And a quick way to jump to jobs, and also documentation. So you can create markdown files about your scripts. They show up here, and they also show up in the portal. So I'll show that in just a little bit. If you actually jump into a script, I think we'll look at this one. You'll notice a couple of things that we've added. We've added success rates, so you can see how successful this script is, the average execution time of this script, some additional statistics about where this script is running. So you see this script is running in the integrated environment, which means it's running inside the PowerShell Universal server, but that could be PowerShell 7 or Windows PowerShell. The users that are running this, so you can see the system ran it 1 or 6 times, and then the Atom user ran it 4 times, and then which computers it's running on. So if you have multiple PowerShell Universal instances talking to the same database, it can run on those different nodes. And we've kind of updated the editing experience. I realize it's never going to be as good as Visual Studio Code, and that's pretty much what everyone always tells me is like, okay, I don't really want to edit scripts in here, but we've tried to add a couple things like PS Script Analyzer help. So if I were to, add a couple spaces, and then you can see PS Script Analyzer now ran, and it's going to tell me things like the parameter password has been declared but not used, for example. And you can pop in and find out all the different things that have changed. We've also integrated the help system. So if you click help, and actually don't have any commands, and I have get date, it's going to actually go get the get date help and provide information about that. It'll do the same thing for parameters and stuff as well. I just want to pop over to the portal and just talk a little bit about that. This is an entirely new node that didn't exist in version 4. And the portal itself is a very simple kind of, I'm somehow... There we go. There's the portal, and you can assign resources. This is just an earthquakes app, which I'll talk about in a second. It's just a simple app that displays earthquakes in North America, pretty much. But I have this assigned to my user. If I were a non-admin user, this is where I would land, and I would see all my resources. So I'll jump into the portal a little bit more, but this is kind of the general idea, is that the portal is just a very simple way to find and search for services that you've provided to your users, so that they can use them without having to know anything about PowerShell. And then just a couple other tidbits about the admin console in general. We've added translation support, which is something that was not part of version 4. So if I were to actually select Danish right now, it will switch over to the Danish language. You can see that a bunch of things have been translated, and we're currently working on more of that, and it's actually it's kind of like an open source project, and we've had some contributions from the community. I just looked at this today and realized that someone has translated it to Ukrainian, like 20% of it, so that wasn't there yesterday, I don't think. So we're going to review those and then pull those into PowerShell Universal as we kind of complete that. The other thing that I want to show off is just some support tools that we built in. So we have this warning that says only do this if, I'll turn it back to English. This tool should only be used as directed by Ironman support. But if you're a longtime PowerShell Universal user, or you, this is your development environment, this will provide you with a bunch of information about the internals of PowerShell Universal. So you can see some system information. You can see configuration information that's being returned or set up inside PowerShell Universal. So, we load this from a JSON file. We also load it from environment variables. It'll tell you where it's coming from and that kind of thing. We also do display environment variables, and there are some special environment variables that actually show up at the top with the descriptions of what they do and that kind of thing. And then we even have some tools for working with things like the database. So if I wanted to do something like select name full path from scripts, and I select the configuration database, which is actually the in-memory configuration database for this particular node, you can see that I get all the scripts back from that in-memory configuration database. So it's just kind of a good way to diagnose things that might be happening in your PowerShell Universal environment. All right, so those are some kind of like general new things inside the PowerShell Universal admin console, but I'm actually going to jump into the portal because it's kind of the first place I'm starting to see people go to just kind of get PowerShell scripts added and assigned to their users. So I'm actually going to log in as a different user. I will log in as my Adam user. And it's going to take me over to the portal, and you're going to see I have a different experience because I have different things assigned to this user's role. I have the Earthquakes app, I have the Page app, I have a Processes app, and then I have this onboarding tag, which is like a group of other things. And underneath the onboarding tag, you'll see I have the create user script. And if I were to click that, it's going to show me this create user kind of form based on that script. So here's that documentation that I talked about before. That's a markdown file that you can kind of put whatever you want in there just for some general documentation. And then these forms are generated based on the param block of that PowerShell script. So you might have noticed that. I'll show it in more detail in a sec, but this is just built on that param block, and now I can go ahead and I can execute this script from here. And the user doesn't really even need to know that there's a PowerShell script running. It's just going out to create a user, and then in a second, this should display the output. So it's gonna, I pretty much just take the input and output it as a hash table, and then it's displaying that in the table. So that was the data that was returned. The other thing that you can do with the portal is also use it kind of for reporting purposes. So not only can you have those forms, but you can configure certain scripts to display like the last time they were run. So that's what I've done with this processes script. If I open that, you're going to see it went really quickly. It didn't actually go out and execute that script. It went to the PowerShell Universal database and just got the last execution of that script and put it in a table. So if you had some script that ran on a schedule and you just kind of wanted to report on that to your users, you could easily do that with this table feature. So I'm going to pop over back into my admin user and just show you how that's configured. Go away. All right, so in the create user script, for example, I have these portal settings, and you can see I assigned it to the execute role. That Adam user had that execute role. You could use custom roles here. Doesn't have to be the execute role. I've selected a table output. You can also do text if you'd like. So when it outputs, when it's done, it'll display as text. And then there is this portal behavior that dictates what happens when the user clicks on that script. In this case, it's displaying the form. In the processes one, it's selected to last run. So then it'll actually go get the last run job. You can do last run for that particular user that's clicking it, or you can run it on load. So they click it, it runs, and it reports, but it doesn't display a form. While we're in here, I just wanted to show the create user. If you've never seen this before, this is kind of how the forms are built. Just a standard param block with parameters. If you don't specify a type, it's just going to give you a standard input with a string. If you include mandatory or help text or that kind of thing, it's going to update that form with what you enter there. And then the documentation is just this markdown file that kind of displays that. All right, so I'm going to show this debugging demo. If you haven't seen it, I showed this a couple days ago, but this is another thing that we've added. Is like one thing that people say a lot with PowerShell Universal is my script doesn't work the same in PowerShell Universal as it does in my terminal. And there's lots of reasons for that. PowerShell Universal has lots of assemblies in the same directory, and or it's running as a different user, it's running the service account that doesn't have interactive capabilities and that kind of thing. So there could be a problem. And if you've ever worked with a CI/CD pipeline, you might, have done one of those check-ins where it's like try to fix, working, and then eventually you have a green build. But this is just another tool in your toolbox that you can use to actually debug what's going on in your script. So if I run my script, it's going to hit that wait debugger, and the script is going to transition in breakpoint. And now it's actually waiting on the breakpoint inside PowerShell Universal. And you can see that I have this debug console that's popped up. So just like this is kind of the same experience you would have if you did wait debugger in your terminal. So I can run commands in here, like, okay, I did ls. I can do things like get variable and see the variables that are defined. I can even use the debugging commands like L or list, which will show where in the script I am sitting. So you can see here that I'm sitting in the on the wait debugger command. And then we've added some buttons so you don't have to always type those. But if I want to continue the script, I just hit continue. And it's going to run to success now and switch back over to the log view. The other place that we added the debugger was into apps. So it's one thing to debug a script that you can kind of run over and over again, but if you've ever worked with PowerShell Universal apps, they can get kind of complicated, especially when you have, lots and lots of controls or multiple pages and that kind of thing. You start integrating modules and that stuff. So sometimes it's pretty hard to figure out what exactly is going on. We also recreate script blocks on the fly, which means that the logging sometimes is way off in terms of line numbers, which we've tried to fix a bunch of times. But in this example, what I have is just a simple button, and that button, when I click it, it's going to call wait debugger. I've turned on the show loading switch on this button, so while this on-click event is running, it's just going to show a little spinner and wait for that to finish before that spinner goes away. So if I go view this app now, you can see my button shows up, what is happening there. I click it, and now you can see that it's just spinning. And that's because it went and executed that script block, and it's waiting on that wait debugger. So we have this new debugger tab, and if you click that, you'll see that any endpoints that are waiting on the debugger will show up here. It'll say the run space ID, the process ID, and then you can expand this little thing, and it's going to have the same terminal that we saw in the script. So it prints out some information about where in the script this is. As you can see, I'm debugging the dashboard debugging app. The user that is currently connected is the admin. And then if you have like set IDs on things, you'll see that here, but it's using the auto-generated ones. So just like I did with the script, I can run things like get variable, and you can see there's a bunch of built-in variables that PowerShell Universal puts in there to kind of indicate that we're running inside an app. And from there, you can do some more debugging. And if I continue that, and I go back to my app, you'll see that it's no longer spinning because it's no longer waiting on that breakpoint. So that is just another cool way that we're trying to make it a little bit easier to figure out what's going on inside your PowerShell Universal scripts. One thing I want to mention too is portal pages and widgets. So as you saw, I assigned scripts and apps to my my portal, and then they showed up for my user. But what you can also do is kind of craft custom portal pages, and those are pretty much built with widgets, which are little building blocks that you can put onto your portal page. So widgets themselves are actually based on what we call PS Blazor. So this is a way that you can actually integrate with the admin console's Blazor library from PowerShell. So this is actually Razor code, and it's almost identical to what you would see in C#. And you actually get IntelliSense about the different controls that we have inside the admin console and that kind of thing. The only difference is instead of calling C# on the back end, when you click this button, what it's actually going to do is call PowerShell. So I won't get into the nitty gritty of this, but effectively what it's doing is it's calling that function submit, and then it's getting the value that I put in the input box and putting it into a message service. So there's some custom services that we inject in here and that kind of thing. And from there, I can do stuff like this. So it's interactive, just kind of like the apps, except that it's running inside the PowerShell Universal admin console rather than in this like sub process. So this obviously looks a little complicated, and while we expose this, it's kind of more for something that we hope to be able to ship more and more of these widgets, but provide you guys with the ability to create your own if you'd like. And where we're going to ship those is that PSU Gallery, and if you click the PSU Gallery node in here, you'll see where those will start to show up, and you'll be able to, install those widgets into your environment. And then once they're installed, you can actually add them to your pages. So I have a page here. It actually has my my Echo widget on here. And from this perspective, you don't need to know anything about the PS Blazor or anything like that. You can actually just add these widgets yourself, and they can interface with other things inside PowerShell Universal. So this is kind of zoomed in. You can see that these built-in widgets that we have are like the script form, a script table, a script line chart, a script pie chart. You can add them to this page and like drag them around and lay them out and have them interact with other resources inside PowerShell Universal. The other thing that you can do is add custom widgets, be it widgets you've defined yourself or ones that you get from the PS Gallery. And then these pages, then you can assign to users. You can put a role on that page and assign it to a user. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about testing. So I have a demo.tests.ps1 file here. If I actually go in here, you can see this is like just straight from the Pester website, pretty much. I have a before all that's defining a function. It's going to be returning a hash table with Jacob and age 31. And then I have a describe block with 2 it blocks that are validating whether or not it's returning the right data. And the top one will pass, obviously, because the data matches our get user function. But the bottom one's going to fail because it does not. So now if I go over to the tests page here, you'll see that PowerShell Universal automatically detects files that match the Pester naming convention, demo.tests.ps1. And from here, I can click Run All Tests or Run a specific test, and that's going to pop up something similar to what you would see when running a script. So I can select if I want to run it as a different user, if I want to run it in Windows PowerShell or PowerShell 7, something like that. And then if I want to run it on one of the computers in my environment. So we're just going to run that. I saw this earlier. It should transition right away, but it doesn't until it's done for some reason. And now you can see the test suite ran, and it kind of just collects the NUnit XML that Pester generates. It's kind of similar to what you would see in GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps, something like that. Lots of things can consume this. And what we actually do with this is, obviously, we display it and allow you to dig into the test cases and stuff like that for your Pester tests. But we also store it for historical purposes. So you can see here I've run these demo tests a bunch of times, and I can jump into any one of them to kind of see the status of that test at that point in time. So this feature, I would say, has like the bare minimum to get up and running with Pester tests, and we're kind of looking for feedback to see what else people would like to do with this. I know some things that would be nice to be able to run certain test suites and select multiple files at once and that kind of thing. But yeah, so that's kind of the basics of our Pester integration. All right. So now I'm going to switch modes a little here, and I'm actually going to show you deployments. So if anyone has ever used PowerShell Universal before, one of like the core tenets of like I would say enterprise deployments that require more than one PowerShell Universal instance is Git. So we have Git integration inside PowerShell Universal, and the idea being that you can set Git synchronization up, and it will synchronize your files to a Git repository, and then automatically pull them down if things change. So this is nice because the configuration is shared across PowerShell Universal nodes, and it will pull the configuration and push the configuration when changes are made. And this works great for smaller teams or teams that are well-versed in Git and Git flow, but it doesn't work as great for a lot of other reasons. So we wanted to provide a way that you can actually create artifacts of PowerShell Universal configurations and deploy those to PowerShell Universal environments without having to integrate Git directly into PowerShell Universal. And that's why we added deployments. So you can see here I have a couple different deployments. Deployments are just effectively a snapshot of the files for PowerShell Universal that have been deployed to this cluster of PowerShell Universal instances. And when I say files, that is because PowerShell Universal itself is driven by configuration files. So you can see we have our basic scripts, but we also have this .universal folder that has all the configuration data for our scripts. So you'll see here's a list of all the configuration scripts and stuff. And that's why the Git integration works well, because you can check this in and you can see the diff between the configuration in your PowerShell Universal environment, that kind of thing. But that also means that we can take this as a snapshot, store it somewhere, and then deploy it to our PowerShell Universal instances. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with a fresh PowerShell Universal instance. So I'm just going to stop this. I am going to rename the configuration directory here. And everything is stored in this configuration directory, so renaming it will effectively give me a fresh PSU instance. I'll start that back up. While that's starting, I'm going to pop over to VS Code, and while we do have a decent editing experience inside PowerShell Universal, most people are using VS Code to edit PowerShell. And I think once you reach a certain complexity in your PowerShell Universal environment, sometimes it's easier just to go into the configuration files and quickly edit things, especially when you're familiar with the PowerShell Universal commands and that kind of thing. So what I've set up here is I have a PSU deployment module. And in this deployment module, it just has a simple module manifest that has a module version of 1. It has, just some basic information, pretty much the minimal amount of information you need to create a module and push it to the gallery. I'm actually going to, because I want to show this, creating these. These are actually coming from the PSU Gallery, and of course they're not. There we go. I have a simple module in here, and all it does is it has invoke Malmö command, and that's just going to echo out the command that I put in. And what you can do with PowerShell Universal is not only have scripts that point at PS1s, you can have PowerShell Universal point at modules. So I have a scripts.ps1 in here, and you can see it says new PSU script. The module is PowerShell Universal.malmo, and the command is invoke Malmö command. And what I want to do is take this deployment, because this is a valid PowerShell Universal configuration, and deploy it to my PowerShell Universal instance. And we could do that via the GUI, but I think Gail would cut my fingers off if I did that. So I'm going to log in, and I will just do a couple things. Oh, this is actually something that is new in V5. I forgot that I was going to show, is the first run wizard. So it used to be just dumped you into the console, but this has a couple options. It allows you to set up the admin username and password, some basic security settings, some telemetry data if you want to opt into that, and then a license file. So I'm going to log into my brand new PowerShell Universal instance here, and you can see completely blank. I'm going to put a license in because I need to look at the deployments page. And now I'm going to actually do my deployment. So let's go take a look at what I've done to do that. I have a deployment.build.ps1 that has a couple tasks. So this is using invoke build. It's kind of a build module that allows you to define tasks, and you can call individual tasks inside the PS1, or you can call all of them in a row. So that's what I'm doing. Is the default task will call install modules, it will call compress files, and then it will call publish. Install modules is going to grab some modules from the PowerShell Gallery. It's going to install a custom health check module called Internet Access. That's actually going to add a health check to look for Internet access. And then it's going to pull down PowerShell API.system, which just has some example system APIs that look at things like returning get computer info and processes and that kind of thing. And then it's going to put them into this modules folder. Then we're going to compress the files. So we're going to take all the files in this deployment directory and create a new PEG file. So a new PEG file is pretty much what PowerShell modules are. And a new PEG file is a zip file with all the contents of your module plus some NuGet information. And so that's what compressed PS resource is going to do, and that comes from PS resource get. And then finally, we're going to publish this to our PowerShell Universal instance. So I am actually doing this via the API. We actually also have a PowerShell commandlet called publish PSU deployment to do this. And then I'm going to pass in that PSU new PEG file, and it's going to upload it to PowerShell Universal, and it's going to automatically configure itself. And I just have a simple build script that calls invoke build to do this. And what I need is an app token, because obviously we can't just call this unauthenticated. So if I come back to PowerShell Universal, go to tokens, we'll create a new app token here. Boop. Boop. All right, copy that and put this here. All right, be quiet. All right. So now we're going to run this. PS resource get is complaining because it doesn't support v3 protocols. So we installed the modules, it compressed the files, and it generated this PSU deployment 1.1.newpeg file. And then you can see here, this is the publish command returning successfully. So it called publish, it returned information about the publishing. And now if we go to PowerShell Universal, the first thing you'll notice is that if we go to settings, deployments, we have a new deployment that's been published to PowerShell Universal. Version 1, it was just deployed at 335, called PSU deployment. If we go home and we click health checks, and I run the health checks, you'll see that I get an internet access health check because I pulled that down from the PSU Gallery, stored that module, it discovered that module during the deployment process, and now I have a new health check checking for internet access. The other thing it did was if we go to endpoints, you'll see that all my system endpoints have now been added to PowerShell Universal. I have a basic system endpoint, process endpoint, drive endpoint, network endpoint, that kind of thing. And then finally, if we go to here, I noticed this as well today. You'll see invoke Malmö command is now added to my PowerShell Universal instance. And that is the script that accepts a command. Let's say hello. And now I'm running my module inside PowerShell Universal as well. So it's kind of like taking all your modules, combining them together, creating a root module, and then pushing that into PowerShell Universal as your configuration for the PowerShell Universal environment. And if we actually go look at the files here, you'll see that this is the content of the new PEG file. So we have the modules themselves. So we have the API system and health check and Malmö modules. We have the configuration file that kind of says like you expose this command as a script that I can call in PowerShell Universal. And then we have things like the new PEG file. And this is what NuGet.org or the PowerShell Gallery would look at to determine the metadata for this this particular module. So if we want to, for example, go ahead and update the module, what we would do is, let's say we go in and make a code change. I'm going to just bump this to version 2. I can then go back to my build script and just rerun the deployment. So if I run that again, it's going to compress it, publish it. So now it's publishing up to PowerShell Universal. You can see here now the deployment has an ID of 2. It's version 2, and the time has changed when it published this. And if we go look at this in the platform, settings, deployments. Now we have a new deployment. It's pinned to that version 2 deployment. And if we go into files, you'll see that it actually has version 2 of the module installed. So if you made code changes, PowerShell Universal will reload its entire configuration, and then it'll be running your new version of this deployment. So yeah, the idea here being that now the Git flow is kind of outside PowerShell Universal. You're doing that with the tools that are good at that, like GitHub Desktop and Visual Studio Code. You're authoring your code locally in Visual Studio Code, so you don't have to necessarily use the PowerShell Universal editor and that kind of thing. And you could do these deployments to your local development environment to test them out. And then from there, you could set up a build pipeline that actually does this build process and publishes to your production environment without having to do anything with Git, without having to manually edit anything in PowerShell Universal. So the idea being that it's all automated at that point. All right, so I have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to show a couple secret features that have been added in the last version. I don't think these are actually in 3 or 5.5, and they're coming in 5.6. So these both require custom settings inside app settings.json, so that's what I'm going to do. The first one is, let me think about this. This one. So as you saw, PowerShell Universal is kind of code-based. You have the PS1 files. They generate all the resources inside your PowerShell Universal environment. Oops. Let me just make sure I launched the right thing. Yeah, I launched the right thing. But in certain scenarios, it might make sense to have resources available based on other things in your environment. And where this has come up before is people deploying things to multiple domains, and they want something very static that they don't want to check into Git because they're merging from one Git branch to the other and that kind of thing. And let's just see if that works. Okay. The variables may be different between the two environments or something like that. So what we added is the ability to actually use things like JSON and environment variables to specify resources in PowerShell Universal. So if we actually go to the security and look at the roles here, you'll see I have this Malmö role. So what's interesting about the Malmö role is that does not exist anywhere. If you were to look at the security set or the files. So if we actually go to this universal folder, it's not in here. It's just the basic ones that are. And the Malmö role is actually coming from an environment variable that I've defined inside my configuration. So we actually go to this resources. Resources here. This is defining this environment variable here. So it's saying resource role 0, and the name of my role is Malmö role. And I can set all the properties via multiple environment variables this way. I can also use JSON because there's a JSON configuration system inside PowerShell Universal. So this was specifically asked for both multi-environments where, dev and prod, and for things like Kubernetes where you can set these things up and you can put these in, your Kubernetes configuration or something like Docker Compose to create resources that may be specific to just those like pods or something like that. So that's secret feature number 1. And then secret feature number 2 is this came out of the need for not storing everything in configuration files again, but being able to easily create things that go across multiple nodes. We have some customers that have very, very large and complex environments. And one thing they really, really didn't want to store in the PS1 file was schedules. And PowerShell Universal, under the covers, it uses N80 Framework, and N80 Framework abstracts away the database access. So the internal configuration database for PowerShell Universal is actually done with SQLite, and then the persistent database is done with either SQLite, Postgres, or SQL Server. And because we have that abstraction layer, that means we can point to a different database for configuration data. So there's a setting now that is going to be available to actually switch off persistence from the file system and only store it in the database. So for example, if I go to automation, schedules, create a simple schedule, test, Malmö command. Now I have this simple schedule that's been created. You can see it runs every hour. But if I actually go and look inside my files, you'll see that it did not create a schedules.ps1 script because it no longer, with this configuration, it no longer stores schedules inside PS1 files. It stores them directly in the database. One reason is that you don't maybe not want them in your Git repository for some reason. The other reason being that it's available immediately across all your nodes because they're all talking to the same database. So there's no Git syncing and no deployment or anything like that. You just can create and edit a schedule directly. So this particular hidden feature does not work with every resource. Like, for example, scripts need something on the disk, so that won't work. But things like triggers or schedules or something like that, it would work. So that's kind of the end of what I was kind of going for. There is a lot more in PowerShell Universal, so if you do want to kind of dig around, I'll be at the booth after this, and feel free to stop by, and I can show you anything else that you might have found in the PowerShell Universal release notes or that kind of thing. Or if you want to dig into anything I showed today, just let me know. And thank you very much.